Okay, settling in for a deep dive today that takes us into a life that feels almost pulled from fiction, yet is presented through the lens of spiritual communications as vibrantly real.
Yeah, it really does. We're focusing on a truly unique figure, Little Justin Hulburd.
Right, a powerful medium, yes, but the sources suggest he was also an actor, a poet,
Mhm.
just someone whose very existence seemed to, well, fascinate everyone he encountered.
Absolutely, from, big theatrical figures to military generals, even apparently a U.S. president.
So the question is, what can we possibly learn from a life lived so explicitly connected to and influenced by the spirit world? It's quite a premise.
It really is, and that's where our source material comes in. We have before us this collection of notes and excerpts,
Hmm.
primarily drawn from a document compiled from communications supposedly received through a medium directly connected to Little Justin, or maybe guided by a spirit band who knew him really well.
Okay, so not your standard historical records.
Not at all. Think of these documents as a very specific kind of record. They offer this unique window into a particular view of the spirit world, human existence, even 19th century history, all seen through the claimed perspective of those who, passed on.
It sounds fascinating and maybe a little startling.
Oh, definitely startling at times. It's quite a collection.
And our mission, our shared task as we embark on this deep dive with you listening in, is really just to plunge into these documents.
Right.
We're not here to, pass judgment or say if these claims are true or not.
No, that's not the goal.
Our goal is simply to explore the fascinating perspectives inside these sources, pull out the key insights they offer, and just try to understand the compelling story they tell.
Yeah, about Justin Hulburd, the man, but also about what they call the grand spiritual philosophy they seem to be advocating for.
Exactly. So we'll be your guides, navigating this rich, layered, and sometimes, yeah, utterly surprising material together. We'll pull out the threads they want us to see.
Absolutely. It's a journey into a specific historical moment in spiritualism, but viewed, if you accept the source's premise, directly through the voices of those who claim to be living it on the other side.
Which gives it a very personal, almost intimate feel, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Very intimate perspective on these beliefs and events.
Okay, so let's start by really unpacking the central figure himself, Justin Hulburd. The sources are really insistent from the get-go.
Yeah.
While some might have known him for his acting or poetry, his identity was fundamentally shaped, maybe even dominated, by his role as a powerful medium.
That's explicitly stated, yeah. And it's a critical distinction the sources seem determined to make. He wasn't just, an actor who happened to dabble in psychic stuff.
Right.
He was primarily a medium. And his entire life, reportedly right from his earliest days, was profoundly influenced by this, innate connection to the spirit world.
Ah.
The very description they use kind of sets this tone. They say his life was a tapestry woven with threads from both the earthly and spirit realms.
Wow, that's quite evocative.
Yeah.
Paints a picture of someone living in two worlds at once.
Exactly. Simultaneously.
And this constant presence, this connection to the spiritual realm, it apparently manifested in some really distinctive ways in his personality, his peculiarities.
Yeah.
Sounds like it made him incredibly sensitive.
Incredibly so. That's what the sources describe. This profound sensitivity, this spiritual openness, meant he was, and this is their phrase, swayed to and fro like the wind.
Like the wind. By what?
By emotion, external influences, both physical and maybe spiritual ones too.
Okay.
And this wasn't always easy for him, apparently. There's a pretty remarkable passage where they claim he even described himself as a born drunkard.
A born drunkard. Wow.
Yeah, someone wrestling with this deep, innate craving. But then this craving for whiskey was supposedly miraculously changed.
Changed how?
Changed to a craving for water.
By spirits.
Spirits just changed his craving. That's the claim.
Yeah.
They intervened because they supposedly had a specific work for him to perform. So it's presented as this direct spiritual intervention, to redirect his life force.
Wow, that's quite a claim. A fundamental craving, supposedly altered by spirit influence for a specific purpose. That's intense.
It really is.
The sources also seem to acknowledge, though, that despite this spiritual guidance, his earthly life wasn't exactly smooth sailing.
No, definitely not. Far from it. His life is described as one of many changes, ups and downs.
Which, given where he was apparently found initially, we'll get to that, and just the nature of mediumship back then, maybe not surprising.
Probably not surprising, no. But interestingly, he's also consistently portrayed as someone who always seemed happy, always singing, regardless of his circumstances.
Really? even with the ups and downs.
Apparently, there seems to have been this underlying resilience, maybe a joy that was perhaps spiritually sustained.
And that resilience, that ability to navigate those ups and downs gets emphasized, right?
Yeah.
There's a spirit identified as the Honorable David Davis.
Yeah, big figure in Lincoln's time.
Right. He apparently describes Justin as having an abundance of grit and determination and great courage.
But the mediumship also brought a certain unpredictability, especially when spirits were strongly influencing him.
Okay, how so?
Well, Dr. Milo Pierce, supposedly speaking from the spirit side, notes Justin sometimes used harsh and brutal language when he was under certain influences.
Harsh language.
But then this is placed in stark contrast to his demeanor when he wasn't under influence. Then he apparently had a pretty way with him.
A pretty way.
Yeah, a gentle, mild look from his beautiful eyes that would, quote, win you to his side in no time.
So like a switch could flip.
It suggests a duality, yeah. Maybe different spirits exerting different controls, or just the sheer intensity of the influence changing his nature sometimes.
That's a fascinating contrast. And there's that small, almost endearing detail. Something about not liking being called baby.
Oh, yeah. A spirit claiming to be E.L. Davenport, the actor.
The famous actor.
Right. He mentions Justin just couldn't tolerate being called baby.
Huh. A very human detail amidst all the extraordinary claims.
Exactly. Maybe shows a specific sensitivity or maybe resistance to being infantilized, especially since he apparently looks so young.
Ah, right. The sources mention that repeatedly, don't they? His youthful appearance.
Multiple mentions, yeah. A striking physical peculiarity. He reportedly remained remarkably youthful even in old age, looking decades younger than he actually was.
Which apparently added to his peculiar and strange aura.
Definitely. And the sources even sort of suggest that this unusual preservation, this lack of apparent aging, might have been a subtle but constant manifestation of those otherworldly forces.
Like the spirit connection itself was somehow holding back time physically.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. As if his physical body reflected his spiritual state.
Wow. Okay, so moving beyond just him, his life was also apparently shaped by some really significant relationships.
Oh, hugely. And many of them seem to have formed because of his unique nature as a medium. People were just drawn to him, captivated.
Absolutely. And Mr. Warren stands out, right? The military captain.
Yes, a truly central figure, described not just as a friend, but as this devoted guardian, a father figure who loved Justin with all his life.
And his main concern was protecting Justin.
Seems like it. Protecting him from harmful external influences. He's consistently called Papa Warren throughout the sources.
Papa Warren. That says a lot about their bond.
It really does. And the sources give these specific kind of touching anecdotes. Like Mr. Warren singing Justin to sleep, a very paternal act, especially for a military man.
Yeah.
Or the detail of Warren giving a scornful look to someone named Barrett just for annoying Justin. Real protectiveness.
Fierce.
And there's a particularly poignant moment described where Mr. Warren takes Justin's hand and just leads him away from a potentially overwhelming banquet, physically shielding him.
Wow. These aren't just abstract descriptions then. They're meant to show how intense that love and care was.
Exactly. Specific moments.
And another big figure was Edwin Forrest, the famous actor. He also developed a similar paternal affection.
That's what the sources say. Utterly fascinated by Justin. Playing games with him, feeding him, treating him with this mix of parental affection and deep curiosity. He's called Uncle Forrest.
Uncle Forrest.
Oh.
And there's that anecdote about him forgetting his schedule.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Forrest apparently admits he completely forgot his demanding theatrical schedule because, quote, he was entertaining the little baby.
Huh. That's great. Humanizing.
Totally. And his reaction to seeing Justin's eyes is quoted directly. God, but they are beautiful. It shows these powerful figures weren't just observing him, they were really emotionally impacted.
And the list of influential people fascinated by him just keeps going. Abraham Lincoln.
Old Abe, as they call him sometimes.
Right, Old Abe. And the Honorable David Davis, who we mentioned. Figures of national importance reportedly captivated.
Yeah, the sources mention Lincoln seeing Justin perform. This was apparently in Chicago with Buckley's Serenaders, a popular group back then.
And what did Lincoln think?
Well, his reported comment was telling. It is too pretty for a boy, but whoever it is smart.
Huh. So, struck by the appearance and the talent, even if he couldn't quite place him.
Exactly. This was apparently before Lincoln was president, but the encounter supposedly stuck with him.
And General Winfield Scott. Another major military figure.
Also had a deep emotional connection, according to the sources. Justin reportedly called him Uncle Scott. And Scott, supposedly speaking from the spirit world in these communications, shows this intense concern and love for Justin, even weeping when recounting a story about him being in danger.
Wow, weeping. That's powerful.
It really is. The intro to the book excerpt also lists others. Charlotte Cushman, Laura Keene, E.L. Davenport, James G. Blaine, General George G. Meade.
Many others. A whole circle of prominent people.
Right. And the sources state that this collective group of friends, recognizing how extraordinary his life and mediumship were, determined, while they were still alive, that Justin's experiences should be given to the world. Through the compilation of these spirit communications we're looking at, it suggests this conscious effort by his prominent circle to document his life from their spiritualist perspective, because they believed it held important truths.
Okay, that adds another layer. But shifting gears a bit, the sources also talk about his early life, before these influential figures came along. And it sounds starkly different.
Oh, definitely. A stark contrast. The story of how he was first found is quite poignant, shows real hardship.
Where was he found?
By a Mr. Fuller, apparently living in a cellar in the infamous 5 Points area of New York City.
5 Points. That was a notoriously rough area, right?
Exactly. Tenement district known for poverty, crime, really difficult living conditions in the mid-19th century. And he was reportedly found dressed in filthy rags.
Why?
His good clothing had apparently been sold for liquor, presumably by whoever he was living with.
Oh, wow. That's grim.
Very grim. But even in that environment, his connection to the spirit world seems to have manifested powerfully.
How so?
Well, while living there, he reportedly visited the 5 Points mission, and under spirit influence, he apparently delivered a sermon.
A sermon.
As a child.
Yeah. And it was supposedly so profound and surprising coming from a child in those circumstances. It just captivated everyone who heard it.
But this early manifestation of his abilities, it wasn't always met with understanding, even by those close to him.
No, definitely not. The sources state his foster parents couldn't comprehend his mediumship. They believed he was possessed by a devil.
Oh, no.
And apparently they tried physical discipline to beat it out of him.
That's awful. Just terrible.
It is. And there's that really strange, dramatic anecdote about an old lady who encountered him.
Yeah. What happened?
She was so unnerved by him, convinced he was a witch, that she apparently wanted him killed right then and there.
Killed? Just for being strange.
Apparently. And the sources add this dramatic twist. Her reaction became frantic because shortly after seeing him, the bottom of her carriage mysteriously dropped out. Whoa. Okay. Whether that's coincidence or presented as consequence, it really highlights the fear and superstition his abilities could provoke back then.
Absolutely. In a less understanding era.
So despite these early struggles and the intense, often misunderstood nature of his mediumship, Justin also pursued this theatrical career. And the sources really show how his spiritual nature seems to have intertwined with his stage work.
Yeah, maybe even driven it.
He played a variety of roles, the sources mention: the Greek slave, Dancing with Annette Galetta, parts in Frou Frou, the Warlock of the Glen, and famously Ariel in Shakespeare's The Tempest.
Right. And beyond specific roles, he was also renowned for his persona as the peerless queen of burlesque comedy.
Queen of burlesque comedy. That sounds like quite a blend theatrical skill, but maybe also that unpredictable energy from his mediumship.
I think that's exactly it. His performances sound truly unique, definitely not conventional acting.
How so? What do they describe?
Descriptions include a wild dance, spontaneous shouting, tearing clothes off right there on stage.
Tearing clothes off.
Apparently. And after heavy, intense scenes, he'd sometimes fall exhausted and need to be literally carried or led off stage.
Wow. That doesn't sound like just stage directions.
No, it sounds like moments where the spirit influence was intensely physical, really blurring the lines between performance and maybe a trance state.
So the mediumship wasn't just for private seances, it spilled onto the public stage.
Seems like it, absolutely.
And the sources are full of anecdotes about this unpredictable spirited behavior, both on stage and during rehearsals, too, right?
Oh, yeah. Accounts of him spontaneously calling someone a great big rooster.
Seriously.
Seriously. Or telling someone else they weren't civilized yet. Or just flat out declaring he didn't think much of a particular theater because playing there would hurt his name. Very blunt.
And some physical stuff, too.
Yeah, more physically expressive moments mentioned include kicking someone.
Kicking someone.
Uh-huh. putting his feet up on someone's pants, which sounds incredibly cheeky,
Totally cheeky.
and giving Edwin Forrest that blunt assessment. The damnedest looking actor.
Huh. Wow. Okay, so these details really paint a picture of someone maybe not adhering to typical social or professional norms, possibly because of spirit influence or just a unique personality linked to that spiritual openness.
That's the connection the sources make, yeah. But his mediumship wasn't just these dramatic or eccentric outbursts. They also describe more, let's say, traditional manifestations happening around him, things that confirmed his abilities to others.
Like spirit reps.
Yeah, witnessing spirit raps is a common theme. E.L. Davenport's spirit recounts hearing this peculiar noise on a wall that grew louder. Edwin Forrest apparently recognized it immediately as spirit raps.
And Davenport also mentioned an unseen hand.
Yes, taking a book from a table at one point. Pretty direct physical manifestation.
And Mrs. Buckley's spirit had an even more dramatic story.
Oh yeah, really vivid account. Raps occurring at a dinner party, again growing louder, and then an unseen hand physically grabbing an old gentleman by the hair.
By the hair.
Yeah.
What did he do?
Well, the source says he had a rather earthy reaction. But yeah, these weren't quiet little taps. They're presented as physical, undeniable events for those present.
Undeniable proof from their perspective.
Right. And he also had these notable performances attended by significant figures who later show up in these spirit communications.
Like Lincoln seeing him with Buckley serenaders. We mentioned that.
Exactly. And David Davis, E.L. Davenport, apparently Davenport saw him with the famous Ada Isaacs Menken in a play called Dashing Blanchard. Charlotte Cushman too, they all witnessed him perform. And sometimes the sources specifically mention manifestations happening during the performance or connected to it.
His singing also gets singled out, like a nightingale, they say.
Yeah, remarkable singing. And they list specific songs showing his range wasn't limited. Hymns like, "Nearer, my God, to thee, Jesus, let me to thy bosom fly."
But also popular songs.
Yep. Songs of the era like Jock of Hazeldean, Coming Through the Rye, and even a snippet of another, Till Kiss a Bonnie Lassie When the Key Comes Hame.
Huh. Okay, so a real range. Maybe catering to different audiences or moods. Or maybe different spirits influencing the choices.
That's the question, isn't it? How much was him? How much was influence?
Now here's where the narrative takes a turn that seems almost, well, too extraordinary. But it's presented as fact within these documents. The claim he was a spy.
Yeah, a spy and messenger for the Union during the Civil War. It's a remarkable story.
And it's mainly told by the spirit of General Winfield Scott.
Primarily, yes. One of the key military figures at the time. He tells the story of Justin, apparently sent out to scout near Lynchburg, Virginia. He gets captured, but not by Confederate soldiers.
Who then?
By local planters, who then brought him to a Confederate colonel.
Okay.
Scott's spirit says the colonel apparently mistook Justin with his youthful look for a little girl dressed in boy's clothes.
A girl.
Ah.
But Justin's response wasn't exactly meek, was it?
Not at all. Described as incredibly bold, defiant towards the colonel. Reportedly called him a damn Lincoln imp. Totally. And even asked if rebel officers were handsome. Just showed no fear of death.
And there was a prediction he made then.
Yeah, a specific prediction Justin supposedly made right there to the colonel. That his hanging wouldn't happen until Richmond fell and he met General Lee face to face.
And did that happen?
According to General Scott's spirit communication, astonishingly, yes, that prediction came to pass later in the war.
Wow. Okay. And his escape. Also guided by spirits.
That's how it's presented. Voices or spirits reportedly telling him which way to go. He eventually made it safely inside Union lines, met Captain Knowles.
And what was his excuse for being out there?
Classic Justin, apparently. According to the source, just a rather flippant, just over there a little way to see my girl.
Ah. While potentially carrying vital intelligence.
Exactly. He wasn't empty-handed. Reportedly carrying crucial intelligence diagrams, dispatches about rebel movements.
And adding another touch of that human peculiarity. Scott's spirit says Justin's first concern wasn't the intel.
Nope. It was insisting he wanted food first.
Priorities.
Right.
Priorities indeed. Now, this whole spy story, does it get backed up by anyone else in the sources?
It does, actually. From another spirit communication, Bessie Foster's spirit apparently confirms that the Justin Hulburd she admired as Cinderella, maybe a stage name or role, was the same person who later, through mediumship, guided her son safely through rebel lines all the way to Washington.
Okay, so that links the actor, the medium, and the spy aspects together.
Exactly. And there's another detail from David Davis's spirit that adds a layer of secrecy.
Yeah.
Davis states that he kept the secret of Justin being Lincoln's spy until after he himself had passed into spirit life.
Why?
He'd apparently promised Mr. Warren, Justin's guardian, as a gentleman, that he would keep it secret. Underscores how confidential and sensitive this role supposedly was.
Gotcha. But what's really interesting about this spy narrative and kind of crucial for understanding these sources is what General Scott's spirit says about when this was revealed.
Right. He says the prediction or revelation that Justin was his beloved friend and had acted as a spy wasn't something he communicated during the war itself.
When then?
It was a prediction or confirmation made through Justin's mediumship after Scott himself had died and was in spirit life.
Ah, okay. That's a key distinction. So the source is presenting this as information revealed from the spirit world about past earthly events, not necessarily a contemporary account from the Civil War era itself.
Exactly. It highlights that these documents are primarily records of spirit communications about Justin's life, gathered after the fact from those claiming to know him in spirit.
Okay, that makes sense. And how do the sources describe the end of his earthly life?
They place his final years in the mountains near San Diego, California.
Why there?
Well, George Warren's spirit describes the location as an ideal spot for spirits to commune. Something about beneficial natural elements being conducive to spiritual work.
So he went there to continue his mission.
Reportedly, yes. Continuing his mission, which was explicitly stated as demonstrating the truth of spiritualism, the sources portray his whole life less as just events and more as this deliberate battle.
The battle against what?
Against skepticism, persecution. And they state he emerged victorious in demonstrating the truth of spirit reality through his life and his mediumship.
And they mention his youthful appearance again here.
They do, yeah. Tying back to that earlier point, his unique preservation, his youthful look, mentioned again in the context of his later years, possibly as a physical sign of those otherworldly forces.
A physical marker of his spiritual nature, as they saw it.
Seems like it. And it's also worth noting, Mary C. Morse's spirit mentions that the actual recording of these specific communications we're reading, that was a deliberate task.
Given to whom?
To a Mr. E.W. Hulburd, chosen by the spirit band precisely so he could swear that the communications were genuine. Adds that layer of asserted authenticity to the document itself.
Right, so we have this incredibly layered portrayal of an individual, a medium whose life was this constant interplay between earth and spirit, hardship, amazing connections, fame, alleged espionage, and this lifelong mission.
It's a really vivid picture, yeah. But like we said at the start, this deep dive isn't just about the man, Justin Hulburd. It's about the messages, the broader view of existence, what the sources call that grand spiritual philosophy.
Exactly. Often delivered through the voices of the spirits who supposedly knew him.
Right. Which brings us to how these sources fundamentally redefine death and existence from their perspective.
Yeah, this is huge in the documents. For the spiritualists and spirits communicating here, death is consistently presented not as an end. Not at all.
No, it's a transition. They even call death a misnomer for what they consider real life.
Real life being.
Yep.
Spirit life.
Exactly. It's described quite simply as the laying down of an old garment, casting it aside for a new one that you put on in the New Jerusalem.
So the body is just temporary.
Just a vessel. The spirit, the true self, sheds it but retains its essential nature. It doesn't lose its faculties, its mind, its individuality when it passes over.
And a core comfort, a key tenet they present, is that friends and loved ones on the other side, they're not lost to us.
No, they continue to exist as spirits, and crucially, they continue to have the capacity to communicate, which is the very basis of the source material we're digging into right now.
Right. And what's particularly compelling, maybe adds that touch of unexpected detail, is how they extend this continuity beyond humans.
Oh yeah, that's fascinating. The sources include descriptions from Justin, supposedly in spirit form, of seeing and recognizing beloved pets.
Pets. Like dogs and cats.
Dogs and cats, specifically mentioned, as proof that consciousness, individuality, recognition persist beyond the physical body, even for animals.
Is there an example?
There's a really specific one given by George Warren's spirit, seeing his female spaniel dog identifiable by 2 light spots over her eyes and a short tail. That level of detail is remarkable, speaks to the specificity of their claims.
It certainly makes the idea of continued existence more tangible, more relatable maybe.
Definitely. The sources draw this clear contrast. Physical death is just leaving the body for them to put in a casket and to lay in the grave. But the true event is the spirit had fled, as a spirit named Ricardo recounts it. The emphasis is always on the body being merely left behind, while the spirit goes on.
Okay. And this understanding of death and continued existence, It directly informs their perspective on human nature and accountability, right?
Absolutely. The spirits, now maybe free from physical limits and having a clearer view, offer insights into what they call karma, or just a system of settling accounts for your actions in life.
That's a significant theme, isn't it? We see examples of spirits expressing deep remorse or describing needing to work to atone for mistakes made on Earth.
Yeah, definitely. For instance, the spirit of Jefferson Davis.
President of the Confederacy.
Right. He reportedly expresses remorse, not necessarily for his political stance in itself, but for his high ambitions and egotistical desires that he now sees led to the ruin of others. It's about personal motivation and impact.
Interesting. And there's Dr. Joshua Thorne.
Yeah, identifies himself as having been a conventional physician on Earth. Apparently, he learns in spirit life that some of his medical errors cause suffering.
Oh, wow.
And he now feels compelled to atone by reaching out to others, presumably through communication or spiritual work, to try and counterbalance that past harm somehow.
And Helen Bushy Head and Mary Seymour's. They also confess things.
They do. In their spirit communications, they confess to past credulity, self-conceit while living. They seek forgiveness and state they are now actively working to outwork their past errors.
So these examples really illustrate the source's belief that growth, learning, and some kind of reckoning for your actions, that all continues after you die.
Exactly. It doesn't stop. And this belief system has a very clear and actually quite strong stance on how that purification or settling of accounts happens.
Okay.
It's explicitly stated that it does not come through religious concepts like atonement or, importantly, deathbed repentance.
They're against deathbed repentance. Why?
They call it a curse to the Christian world because, from their viewpoint, it allows people to commit harmful acts throughout life, believing they can just be wiped clean at the very end without real consequence for their actual deeds.
Okay, so no easy way out. How do they say purification happens then?
Through good works and actions and love to all the children of God and speaking the truth at all times, the entire emphasis is placed firmly on your conduct and your truthfulness during your physical life.
Deeds, not just beliefs.
Exactly. Spirit life is described as an abode of peace and bliss where all is harmony, unified in nature's God. Knowledge keeps growing there, and the ultimate goal of perfection must come sometime. It's a process.
And this vision of spiritual progress and accountability leads right into one of the most prominent messages from these sources, a really profound critique of what they consistently call man-made religion.
Oh yeah, this is a core tenet, repeated by various spirits throughout the documents. From the outset, they just flatly assert all religion is man-made.
And because it's human-created.
It's seen as inherently flawed, susceptible to human failings, ignorance, self-conceit, deception, dogma that just obscures the truth.
So life, from this perspective, isn't some unfathomable mystery needing blind faith.
No. Instead, they propose it can be understood by studying the laws of nature with a view to spiritual development.
Studying nature?
Yeah. It's presented as a direct challenge to conventional religious ideas that divine knowledge is beyond human understanding, or only accessible through scriptures or clergy.
And they're pretty harsh on priests and ministers specifically.
Extremely harsh in some places. Spirits like Thomas Jennings accuse them of deliberately trying to dwarf the mind of intellect by forcing upon them a bugbear of corruption. Basically, turning people into imbeciles in religion by discouraging rational thought and promoting fear or superstition instead.
Wow. And the sources even include interactions where these religious figures, now in spirit, are supposedly accusing each other of lying and preaching falsely back on Earth.
That's right, it's quite dramatic. Religious superstition is repeatedly framed as this state the soul has to actively emerge from to get to true spiritual understanding.
And John Bartlett's spirit makes a really dramatic prediction about the Word of God.
Yeah, pretty intense language, saying that the beastly thought that they now call the Word of God will become an outcast covered with leprosy suggests a complete rejection and eventual decay of conventional religious doctrines as they see them.
So what's the alternative they offer? This grand spiritual philosophy.
Exactly, presented as a stark contrast. And knowledge and truth are absolutely central to it. Dr. Joshua Thorne's spirit declares, truth only sits upon the throne, royalty has no learning there. Truth is the only religion.
And spiritual theosophy gets mentioned.
It does, specifically named as one of the leading schools or paths within this philosophy, presented as opening the door of reason to the true God.
Reason being key.
Absolutely key. The sources argue that human nature, especially in less developed times, was sort of groveling in a mist of superstition, needing growth and civilization. And critically, needing an appeal to their reasoning faculties to perceive something higher than just living like animals.
And it's through these divine reasoning powers, according to Thomas Jennings' spirit.
That one perceives no other God but clear and defined intellect embellished in the beauties of nature.
Okay, so not a personal God in the traditional sense. More like the divine is inherent in the rational structure and beauty of the natural world. Accessible through intellect, observation, not dogma.
That's exactly the idea presented, yeah.
Okay, so moving into more specific concepts and phenomena detailed in the sources, the reality of spirit communication itself, the foundation of these documents, is described through all sorts of manifestations experienced through or around Justin.
Yeah, we've touched on some, but the sources give more detail. The raps, for instance, not just taps, described as a peculiar noise on the wall that could grow significantly louder, almost demanding attention.
And voices.
Voices were also heard, sometimes just calling names, other times speaking more fully, and those unseen hands.
Right, taking a book, grabbing someone's hair.
Provided that physical, undeniable interaction with the unseen realm, at least for those present.
And mediumistic control, where spirits actually influence the medium's body or voice.
That's discussed as a direct way spirits communicate or interact. Mary C. Morse's spirit explicitly describes hearing a voice talking through Justin, and she names specific spirits, like Gladstone as someone named Hammond, as having controlled him at different times.
And Justin's sensitivity made this easier.
Exactly. His nature being swayed to and fro is presented as what facilitated this high level of spirit influence.
Clairvoyance is also mentioned, seeing things remotely.
Yep. David Davis's spirit gives that striking example involving a lady medium in Washington, D.C. She clairvoyantly saw a private meeting Davis had with President Lincoln.
And the details she reportedly saw were amazing.
Right. Truly remarkable, according to Davis's spirit. She accurately described the scene, including a mulatto wench being ushered in, giving the president a sweet potato, and then singing and dancing.
Details she couldn't possibly have witnessed physically.
Exactly. And Davis expresses his astonishment that such private moments could be revealed through spirit power.
The sources also get into the more complex, often controversial stuff like materialization and dematerialization.
They do. While acknowledging the general skepticism, even among spiritualists themselves back then, the testimony of H.M. Higgins's spirit is highlighted, presented as evidence of genuineness in certain cases.
What did Higgins claim to see?
He testifies to witnessing genuine materialization through a medium named Henry Gordon at a Mrs. Sedum's home. But what's particularly compelling, and lends it weight within the source, is his specific description of seeing two spirits dematerialize.
Not just vanish.
No, not just vanish. He describes them seeming to dissolve and pass through the carpet and the floor.
Wow, that's specific.
Very specific. And he contrasts this detailed observation with the worst frauds, claiming materialization that he also encountered, making a clear distinction based on his purported spirit perspective.
Okay, that context is important. Another huge concept in the philosophy presented here is reincarnation, right, or re-embodiment.
Oh yeah, deeply integrated, not just a theory. It's presented as a fundamental law of spiritual growth.
How is it framed? What's its purpose?
It's framed as the primary means through which the spirit gains perfect knowledge and wisdom, eventually achieving perfect nirvana, which they seem to equate with the true and perfect light.
So it's how the spirit progresses towards divinity.
That's the idea. They refer to it as the reincarnated sense order of wisdom. Dr. Milo Pierce's spirit describes it as a civilizing process upon our minds, leading to that fundamental understanding that we are spirits living in a body, not the other way around.
And they connect this to specific historical movements, like theosophy.
Yes. Madame Blavatsky's spirit communication mentions her earthly travels in Egypt and India, calling them the land of ancient theosophy, and she talks about her role in helping organize modern theosophy, explicitly linking this work to reincarnation and the soul's growth towards divinity.
And in the prediction section, this concept is applied even more broadly.
Yeah. Aztec spirits reportedly predict their people's eventual rise and return to rule through reincarnation, seeing it as the way they'll eventually drive out the Spanish influence in Catholicism.
And Mr. Gladstone's spirit makes a personal prediction about it, too.
He does, stating he would be born again in the United States in his next incarnation. So this law of progression, evolution through re-embodiment, is presented as the mechanism for purifying the soul and improving its spiritual condition across successive lives.
Okay. Now, while they're advocating for this grand spiritual philosophy and genuine communication, the sources are also incredibly harsh about false mediums, right?
Oh, remarkably harsh. Repeated, strong warnings against fraudulent practices. It's a constant theme, almost an obsession in some parts.
What do they call them?
Mountebanks, fakirs, charlatans, imposters. They accuse them of deliberately trying to fleece people for money with fake spirit communication.
This seems crucial for the sources, doesn't it? To distinguish the real from the fake.
Absolutely crucial. They're trying to present their own communications through Justin or others as genuine, so they sharply contrast these frauds with figures like Justin, who is consistently called a most truthful medium, a genuine medium.
And they describe specific fraudulent practices. Gives us a glimpse into the scene back then.
They do. Mention soliciting money under false pretenses, like claiming to be famous spirits who need funds for a medium's home. Charlotte Cushman's spirit tells a story about that.
Yeah.
She tested a supposed spirit claiming to be Madame Rachel by speaking to it in French. The fraudulent medium couldn't understand, exposing the trick.
Clever. What other frauds?
Using techniques like ventriloquism for independent voices. Traveling around claiming to be someone famous. They're not like an imposter claiming to be the well-known medium Miss Cook of England. Or pretending to be a preacher but actually being a swindler. Another thing Cushman's spirit mentions encountering.
And H.M. Higgins' spirit also spoke out against ventriloquism.
Yes, calling it one of the worst burlesques on the spiritual philosophy, and labeling the medium a natural bilk. Strong words.
Definitely. So the message is clear. True spiritualism, according to these sources, is about truth, wisdom, genuine phenomena, not financial exploitation or cheap tricks.
Exactly. And some spirits, like Mary C. Morse, even say they were wary of these mountebanks and frauds even before they passed into spirit life. So it was apparently a recognized problem from both sides of the veil, according to these documents.
Okay, beyond the philosophy and the phenomena, the sources also contain numerous threads of prophecy and vision, glimpses into the future or confirming past hidden events, all supposedly through mediumship.
Yeah, lots of predictions scattered throughout.
We touched on some, but let's revisit. That prediction about Lincoln becoming president, that's a striking one.
It really is. David Davis's spirit describing being there, hearing the prediction made through Justin, laughing it off as impossible.
Right, laughing.
Only to then supposedly hear George Washington's spirit solemnly affirm that it would happen. Quite a scene.
Definitely. And the prediction about the Civil War, the rebellion, coming true, also mentioned as significant.
Yeah, noted by General Winfield Scott and connected to a coal shepherd, presented as another fulfilled prophecy through Justin.
There are also prophecies about specific places developing, like San Diego.
Yes, quite detailed predictions regarding the San Diego area, near where Justin apparently spent his later years.
What kind of details?
Really specific stuff. A canal from the city to the Gulf, numerous bathhouses and resorts popping up, the desert, which seemed barren then, becoming grand and beautiful. Millions of people, including wealthy ones, building a large city with wide streets, substantial houses, large hotels holding 2,000 people. The area becoming a popular destination for people from colder climates, lots of sailing. It's a very concrete vision of future development for that specific region, delivered way back then.
That's fascinating to read now. And revisiting General Scott's spirit communication, that prediction made after Scott's death, confirming Justin was his spy friend.
Right. That's presented as a significant piece of information, a prophecy revealed from the spirit realm about past events, confirming Justin's historical role from their spiritual perspective.
And there were other predictions mentioned too.
Yeah, several others. Bessie Foster's spirit recounts her own mediumistic prediction of someone named Bill Smith dying of apoplexy, which the source claims was fulfilled.
Okay.
The Aztec spirits, linking back to reincarnation, reportedly predict their people would rise again, rule again, reincarnating to drive out the Spanish and Catholicism, possibly under U.S. rule. They also mention sunken cities, maybe linked to Atlanteans.
Atlanteans too, and Gladstone's spirit had predictions about government.
Several, especially for the U.S., anticipating radical change, universal women's suffrage.
Women's suffrage.
Back then.
Yep. And the election of a woman president who would serve for 10 years. Plus the establishment of a Grand Council of 12 elected for life. Big changes predicted.
Very big. And Gladstone also predicted a huge canal.
An immense ship canal, yeah. Called it an inland sea. Dug across the continent, maybe from Florida, way up towards Seattle,
Yeah.
supposedly modifying the climate.
Wow. An inland sea.
And he even mentions they'd find the bed of a similar ancient canal during this future project.
Okay. And a couple more minor ones.
Margaret Wilson's spirit addresses the character of servants of God, noting only a few were truly conscientious in her experience. And Bridget Kelly's spirit communication tells of her learning in the spirit world about the deceit of priests. So consistent themes keep popping up.
Right. So bringing all these threads together, this singular, extraordinary life of Justin Hulburd, this detailed philosophy of the spirit world, the specific, sometimes dramatic anecdotes and relationships, the prophecies, it really paints a unique and complex picture from a very specific viewpoint. It really does. And what's so striking is how the sources constantly weave together the seemingly mundane details of life with these profound spiritual concepts and extraordinary claims.
Yeah, like you hear about his eating habits, how he dressed, stage rehearsals, tenement life, dinner parties, even him crying.
Right alongside discussions of karma, reincarnation, divine intellect, spirit communication, huge prophecies. It's all mixed together.
The text itself, this compilation of spirit communications, it almost acts like its own kind of medium, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Preserving these messages, these stories, this perspective from another time for us to explore today.
That's a great way to put it. A historical document completely shaped by spiritualist beliefs.
And that leads us to reflect, what's the power? What are the implications of diving into material like this? What does this unique, complex portrayal of Justin Hulburd, seen through this lens of spirit communication, teach us? About human nature, maybe. About mediumship historically. Even about performance itself framed this way.
And how do these perspectives presented in the sources, death as transition, accountability rooted in earthly actions, the divine found in reason and nature, not dogma, how do they challenge or maybe even align with modern beliefs?
Or our lack of belief.
Right. The sources make a very strong case, from their viewpoint, for personal responsibility. Your deeds and actions in life are what count. And they offer this stark critique of deception, whether it's religious claims or fake mediums.
And there's that whole concept of growth and learning just continuing boundlessly beyond physical life. This pursuit of perfection, not as something you achieve in one go, but as this continuous spiritual journey across maybe multiple lives and into the spirit realm. It's a vast canvas they present.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the sources surrounding Justin Hulburd, we've journeyed through a life presented as just profoundly shaped by mediumship right from the start.
Yeah, a life lived among prominent figures, navigating hardship and surprising fame, even reportedly involved in huge historical events like being a Civil War spy. We've also unpacked this detailed spiritual philosophy presented through these claimed spirit communications. A view of death as continuation.
A system of accountability based intrinsically on earthly actions, a really forceful critique of conventional man-made religion.
And the centrality of truth, reason, and reincarnation in the path towards spiritual growth and understanding.
We've explored the specific phenomena described, from physical things like raps and unseen hands, to accounts of clairvoyance and materialization, and crucially highlighted those explicit warnings from the spirits against the frauds they say plagued the movement.
Right, and we looked at all those threads of prophecy woven throughout predictions about presidents, wars, future cities, even massive canals.
Like these sources, when you take them all together, they present this comprehensive, internally consistent worldview, where communication is believed to cross the veil between life and death.
Where accountability for your actions is presented as just an intrinsic law of existence.
And where the pursuit of truth, wisdom, personal spiritual development is paramount across all stages of being.
It leaves us with a lot to consider, doesn't it? What does it mean to seek truth and wisdom, wherever sources might claim it's found, whether it's in historical documents like these, or in nature, or somewhere else entirely?
Yeah. And how might, considering this specific historical spiritualist perspective, as it's laid out in these documents about Justin Hulburd's life and world, how might that influence how you, listening, view fundamental concepts like life, death, information itself, or even your own personal journey of knowledge and growth?
It's certainly a perspective that offers a different way of seeing the world. Lots to mull over.